US and Europe discuss security guarantees for Ukraine outside NATO. In a recent interview with American journalist Tower Cannon, U.S. Presidential Envoy to the Middle East Stephen Wav revealed that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak have acknowledged that Ukraine cannot join NATO in the near future. However, Wav emphasized that the United States and European countries continue to hold discussions on providing Ukraine with security guarantees based on principles similar to NATO's Article 5, which ensures collective defense. Wav noted that talks have been underway about whether Ukraine can receive such collective defense protections from the US and Europe without becoming a full NATO member. "I believe it's still possible," he said. Earlier this month, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni also proposed extending NATO's Article 5 protection to Ukraine without requiring its formal accession to the alliance. According to Meloni, this approach would offer long-term and effective security for Ukraine, more so than other options, including deploying peacekeeping forces to monitor ceasefire agreements. She stressed that sending military forces to Ukraine, whether from the UK or other nations, would be a complex and potentially less effective solution. Security guarantees are currently one of Ukraine's key conditions before any peace agreement with Russia can be reached. Meanwhile, Czech President Petr Pavel also highlighted the importance of security assurances for Ukraine. He stated that such guarantees should consist of two parts: a strategic agreement between Washington and Kyiv, and concrete commitments from European countries that have pledged to support Ukraine. President Pavel explained that due to the presence of American businesses in Ukraine, Washington would have a vested interest in protecting its assets there. He added that current discussions are focusing on forming a new alliance of willing countries, those capable and ready to deploy stabilization forces to Ukraine after a peace deal is reached between Kyiv and Moscow.
Ukrainian soldiers struggle amid U.S. aid cut decision. Ukrainian soldiers are facing serious challenges following former U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to cut military aid. Soldiers from a mobile air defense unit near Kyiv expressed disappointment, but affirmed their commitment to continue fighting. For security reasons, they provided only their first names when speaking to Business Insider about the current situation. A soldier nicknamed Oxy stated that he does not see this as a decision by the American people, but rather by one individual. "It's unfortunate. We will keep fighting," he said. On March 3rd, Trump ordered a halt to military aid to Ukraine as part of an effort to pressure Kyiv into joining a peace process with Russia under unfavorable terms. In the following days, the U.S. also reduced intelligence sharing with Ukraine and restricted its access to critical satellite imagery. These moves have made Ukraine more vulnerable to Russia, which is gaining an advantage on the battlefield. Some Ukrainian officials reported that the aid cut has prevented Kyiv from using certain advanced weapons and has raised concerns about ammunition shortages. Ukraine's air defense forces fear that the aid suspension could impact their ability to use M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, an essential weapon for shooting down explosive-laden Russian drones. "If we run out of ammunition for American machine guns, we will use other weapons. Even if they are of smaller calibers, we will still complete our mission," a soldier said. The deputy commander of the air defense unit, also nicknamed Oxy, emphasized that the lives of Ukrainian citizens depend on U.S. military support. "We hope this issue will be resolved soon. We are defending our land, and we will continue to fight," he stated. Late last month, during a White House meeting, Trump expressed doubts about Ukraine's ability to defeat Russia. The U.S. aid reduction has sparked concerns about instability if Washington does not continue its support. Some Ukrainian officials hope the country can rely on its growing defense industry and support from European nations, but they acknowledge that U.S. assistance, especially in air defense, is crucial. Serhiy Ryn, a member of Ukraine's Parliamentary Committee on National Security and Intelligence, stated that while Ukraine can manage tactical operations near the front lines without U.S. aid, Washington's involvement is vital for strategic operations. The only female soldier in the air defense unit, nicknamed Lana, said it is difficult to predict the long-term consequences of this decision. "Let's wait and see what happens," she said. Meanwhile, some Ukrainian officials warned that the U.S. decision could have severe consequences. Oleksandr Markin, commander of the Territorial Defense Forces and mayor of Irpin, a city near Kyiv, expressed shock at Trump's move. In a recent interview, he stated, "If the U.S. does not help Ukraine, Russia could expand the war into other European countries. The U.S. is the only country that can stop Russia. It remains unclear how long the military aid suspension will last." Trump has repeatedly voiced dissatisfaction with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's approach to peace negotiations. Analysts from the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War, ISW, predict that Russia may exploit the U.S. aid disruption by intensifying missile and drone attacks against Ukraine. The U.S. leads global arms exports. Ukraine becomes the largest importer. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, CEPRI, has released a study showing that U.S. arms exports increased by more than 20% in the 2020 to 2024 period compared to the previous 5 years, accounting for 43% of total global arms exports. This figure is significantly higher than the 35% average over the past 2 decades, highlighting the notable growth of the U.S. defense industry. The U.S. dominates arms export market. According to CEPRI, the U.S. holds an arms export market share 4 times larger than France, the second largest arms exporter. During the same period, U.S. arms exports to European countries rose by 155%, largely due to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has become the world's largest arms importer, with its imports increasing nearly 100 times compared to the 2015 to 2019 period. CEPRI reports that 35 countries supplied arms to Ukraine from 2020 to 2024, with the U.S. accounting for 45% of total deliveries, followed by Germany, 12%, and Poland, 11%. Military aid and U.S. defense industry gains. The CEPRI report emphasizes that U.S. military aid to Ukraine has significantly benefited American arms manufacturers. Most of the weapons sent to Ukraine were sourced through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA, from U.S. stockpiles, or purchased directly from American defense contractors using federal budget allocations. The rising demand for weapons in Europe has also boosted U.S. arms exports. As European countries deplete their stockpiles to support Ukraine, they need to replenish their reserves, leading to increased imports from the U.S. Experts note that Europe has surpassed the Middle East to become the largest buyer of U.S. arms between 2020 and 2024. Impact of former President Donald Trump's policies. The surge in U.S. arms exports comes amid increasing pressure from former President Donald Trump on Ukraine to end the conflict after more than 3 years of fighting. Trump has repeatedly stated that the U.S. should be reimbursed for its military aid to Ukraine, most of which consists of military equipment. Additionally, Trump has urged NATO allies to raise their defense budgets to 5% of GDP instead of the previous 2% target. U.S. officials have also encouraged European countries to purchase more American weapons to strengthen transatlantic military alliances. Russia's declining arms exports. While U.S. arms exports are rising, Russia has seen a sharp decline in its global arms sales between 2020 and 2024. According to CEPRI, the war in Ukraine has forced Russia to prioritize its own battlefield needs, while Western sanctions have further hampered its weapons production and trade. Russia's 2 biggest arms customers, China and India, have also begun diversifying their sources. India is increasingly purchasing from Western suppliers, while China is focusing on strengthening its domestic defense industry. In a recent move, the U.S. has expanded its military sales to India. Last month, President Joe Biden told Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi that Washington plans to boost arms sales to New Delhi, including the possibility of supplying F-35 fighter jets, one of the most advanced combat aircraft in the U.S. arsenal. Europe seeks to reduce dependence on the U.S. Although the U.S. remains the dominant arms exporter, some European countries are considering developing their own domestic defense capabilities rather than relying on American suppliers, especially in light of Trump's statements regarding NATO relations. CEPRI researchers note that the current trends reflect a broader rearmament movement in Europe to counter potential threats from Russia. European nations have already acquired nearly 500 fighter jets from the U.S. and continue to place new weapons orders, signaling a major military buildup in the region. According to CEPRI, even without accounting for U.S. arms exports to Ukraine and Israel, the U.S. still held a 37% share of global arms exports from 2020 to 2024, reinforcing its position as the world's top defense supplier.
U.S. aims for Ukraine's ceasefire deal by April 20th, with Kyiv expected to recognize new borders. On March 23rd, Bloomberg News cited a source stating that the United States hopes to reach a broad ceasefire agreement in the Russia-Ukraine war within the next few weeks, aiming for a formal ceasefire deal by April 20th. According to U.S. presidential envoy Stephen Goodson, The most critical issue in the peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is the legal status of the territories, not only those currently controlled by Russian forces, but also areas still under Ukrainian control that were unilaterally annexed by Moscow in September 2022 and enshrined in Russia's constitution. These territories include Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, all of which have portions still held by Ukrainian forces. Moscow demands that Kyiv and the international community recognize these regions as part of Russia, making it a precondition for any peace deal. Goodson also confirmed that Ukraine's potential NATO membership has been removed from the agenda. Instead, an alternative being considered involves providing Ukraine with security guarantees similar to NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. Goodson suggested these two key topics, new borders and security guarantees, could be interconnected and reciprocal. He noted that most of the annexed regions are Russian-speaking and had held referendums in which a majority voted to join the Russian Federation. This, he said, is the crux of the conflict and the first issue that must be resolved. He stated that the U.S. would be willing to provide security assurances to Ukraine, but in exchange, Kyiv would need to recognize Russia's status over certain territories and formalize new internationally recognized borders through a peace treaty. Only by doing so can the conflict in Ukraine be resolved and a sustainable peace be achieved, Goodson emphasized. However, the cost of achieving peace and gaining Western security guarantees would be steep for Ukraine, a country devastated by war, a near-collapsed economy, and the loss of approximately 30% of its territory, including the entirety of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia.
Russia strikes Ukrainian mechanized brigade in Sumy province with Iskander-M missiles. On March 18th, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a video from reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, showing the assembly point of Ukraine's 144th Mechanized Brigade in a forested area of Sumy province. According to the UAV footage, the Ukrainian unit had set up tents and parked military vehicles in the forest to avoid detection. However, Russian UAVs identified the target through gaps in the tree canopy. Following the reconnaissance operation, Russian forces launched an Iskander-M tactical ballistic missile strike on the area. The missile detonated at a high altitude to maximize damage, resulting in secondary explosions and large fires. Russian UAVs also tracked a Ukrainian ambulance evacuating casualties after the attack. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not provide specific details regarding Ukrainian losses, but Russian media estimated that the strike resulted in 65 Ukrainian soldiers killed or wounded, as well as the destruction of 2 trucks and 13 light armored vehicles. The Ukrainian military has not yet commented on the incident. Ukraine's 144th Mechanized Brigade was established in February 2023, initially designated as a reserve infantry brigade. The unit was later upgraded to a full infantry brigade before Ukrainian military command decided to transition it into a mechanized brigade. Russia intensifies attacks on Ukrainian logistics bases. In recent months, Russian forces have repeatedly targeted Ukrainian positions in Sumy province, as the region serves as a key staging ground and logistics hub for Ukraine's operations in Kursk province. Beyond Sumy, Ukrainian units in other areas have also been struck by Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles, a weapon system known for its rapid target engagement and difficulty in interception. One of the most devastating strikes occurred on March 1st, when a Russian Iskander-M missile hit a training ground in Dnipro province, resulting in at least 32 Ukrainian soldiers killed and 153 wounded.
Ukraine and Finland launch International Civil Defense Alliance. On March 19th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Finnish President Alexander Stubb officially launched an International Civil Defense Alliance, with Finland taking the lead role. According to United 24 Media, the initiative aims to strengthen Ukraine's civil defense infrastructure amid ongoing security challenges. As part of the initiative, both sides signed a cooperation agreement to build safe shelters across Ukraine and expand collaboration with European and global partners. Speaking at a joint press conference, President Zelensky emphasized Finland's experience in civil protection and noted that the alliance would mobilize international resources to implement practical shelter projects. "Our countries understand the risks of being neighbors with Russia," said Zelensky. "Finland has a long-standing tradition of effective civil defense, and today we discussed ways to expand this expertise." President Stubb reaffirmed Finland's strong support for Ukraine, stating, "We stand with Ukraine and will continue to do so as long as needed." This civil defense alliance is considered a major step in protecting Ukrainian civilians from ongoing Russian attacks. According to the Kyiv Independent, further details about the alliance will be released in the coming days, although the total funding allocated for shelter construction has not yet been disclosed. President Zelensky's official visit to Finland began on March 18th, during which he met with senior leaders and representatives from the defense industry to discuss military cooperation, EU integration, and sanctions against Russia. Although Russia previously agreed to a 30-day pause in attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, President Zelensky stated that Russian forces continued to strike civilian facilities on the night of March 18th. This is why air defense support is crucial, he said, and pressure on Russia must continue to ensure the safety of our people. Earlier, on February 26th, Finland announced a military aid package worth $660 million, approximately $691 million, for Ukraine. More recently, on March 13th, during a meeting with Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, Finnish Defense Minister Antti Häkkänen unveiled Finland's 28th military aid package, valued at approximately $200 million. Both ministers also signed a memorandum of understanding to boost bilateral defense cooperation.
France urges stronger pressure on Moscow. U.S.-Russia talks on negotiation process. On March 15th, U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held a phone conversation to discuss the next phase of negotiations aimed at ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tommy Bruce stated that both top diplomats agreed to continue efforts to restore communication channels between Washington and Moscow. The announcement did not specify the exact date for the next round of U.S.-Russia negotiations, which are being hosted by Saudi Arabia. Additionally, Secretary Rubio updated Minister Lavrov on military activities in the Middle East, where U.S. forces carried out airstrikes on March 15th targeting Houthi militant positions in Yemen. Despite recent tensions between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky, Kyiv has agreed in principle to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire brokered by the U.S., provided that Moscow halts its offensive in eastern Ukraine. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin has yet to agree to any ceasefire. Instead, Moscow has outlined conditions that differ from those stated in the U.S.-Ukraine agreement. French President, increased pressure on Russia is necessary. On the same day, in a statement following an online meeting with Ukraine-supporting nations chaired by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron emphasized that Russia has not demonstrated genuine commitment to peace. According to Macron, Russian President Vladimir Putin is escalating the conflict to gain battlefield advantages before entering negotiations. President Macron stated, "Russia needs to provide a clear response. We must also coordinate with the U.S. to apply stronger pressure on Moscow to achieve a ceasefire." Since returning to the White House in January, President Trump has expressed his desire to end the 3-year-long Ukraine conflict and has taken steps to improve relations with President Putin. Earlier, in an interview with local media on March 14th, published late on March 15th, President Macron warned that if Russia does not show a sincere commitment to peace, President Trump will tighten sanctions and take retaliatory measures. This would completely shift the dynamics of the situation, Macron asserted. According to the French president, planning is being expedited in countries willing to provide security assurances for Ukraine if a ceasefire agreement is signed, including the UK and France. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, Ukraine may not survive even with continued aid. In an interview with Fox News broadcast on March 9th, former U.S. President Donald Trump declared that Ukraine might not survive the war with Russia, even if it continues to receive aid from Washington. Ukraine may not survive despite aid. When asked about the possibility of the U.S. stopping military aid to Ukraine, Trump stated that even with continued support, Ukraine would still struggle to survive. He remarked that this conflict should not have happened, but it ultimately did, dragging the U.S. into a mess. Additionally, the former U.S. president criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, claiming that he received aid from the U.S. too easily, like taking candy from a baby under the administration of former President Joe Biden. Trump stated that the U.S. had provided $350 billion in aid to Ukraine, but received nothing in return from Kyiv. Mineral agreement and U.S. demands for Ukraine. During the interview, when asked whether he expected Ukraine to sign a rare earth minerals agreement with the U.S., Trump responded, "Yes, I think it will happen." He also affirmed that he had checked and confirmed that Ukraine possesses significant rare earth mineral resources. However, according to NBC News, U.S. officials revealed that a mineral agreement alone would not be sufficient for Washington to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Trump is reportedly seeking a change in Ukraine's stance on peace negotiations, including a willingness to cede territory to Russia. Furthermore, the former U.S. president also wants Ukraine to hold elections, even hinting at the possibility that President Zelensky may have to step down. Tensions in U.S.-Ukraine relations. According to sources from late February, Trump and Zelensky had a heated argument at the White House. Trump, along with Vice President James David, criticized Ukraine's lack of respect and gratitude toward the U.S. Following the tense exchange, Washington suspended military aid and halted intelligence sharing with Kyiv. On March 11th, the U.S. is expected to hold talks in Saudi Arabia to discuss peace efforts between Russia and Ukraine, as well as a potential mineral cooperation agreement between Washington and Kyiv. Ukraine has no cards to play, while Moscow holds all the advantages. In the interview, former President Trump emphasized that working with Ukraine is harder than working with Russia, as Kyiv has no leverage, while Moscow holds all the advantages. He warned that the U.S. could cut off all support for Ukraine unless Kyiv proves its commitment to achieving peace with Moscow.